Hello and welcome to American Free Thought. I'm John Snider.
And I'm David Driscoll.
This is show number 133. An Alabama city offers offenders the choice of church or jail, and troubled children endure shocking abuse at unregulated Christian homes. So how you doing?
Hey, I am doing pretty good. I heard that you had a 5-year class reunion? That's about the right age, right?
Yeah, 30.
30? So this was high school, I take it.
Yes, my 30-year high school class reunion.
Well, all the ladies that listened to us who had fantasies about you being a young whippersnapper, they were just shattered.
Yeah,
oh well.
That's true. So we went up to Kentucky and attended that, and I went to a very small rural high school, and I really hadn't tracked hardly anybody that I went to high school with. So even though I did go to I went to the 5-year class reunion and I went to the 10-year, but I didn't go. They had 15, 20, 25, but I didn't go to any of those. So I thought, oh, what the heck, I'll go to this one. And, it was good. About what you would expect, really. A room full of virtual strangers whose names look familiar.
Did they do the thing where they had their name and then their high school picture on their name tag?
No, what we did was somebody borrowed the class picture. They had the big thing framed in the hallway at the high school with everybody's picture, and they had that on a big easel so that you could look at everybody's picture, and then we all just had name tags. So,
okay.
So you could just look at somebody's name tag. But I did have a couple of people that were tactless enough to say, "You don't remember me, do you?"
Right.
And of course, the answer to that is no. If you're stupid enough to ask me that question, then I'm going to say no. I don't remember you. But anyway, it was good. It was good. I saw some people that I hadn't seen in a long, long time, and it's funny how people's personalities just don't change.
Yeah, they stay pretty consistent, don't they?
Yep.
It's pretty funny. Yep.
And I have to say too that since a lot of these people had face befriended me in the run up to this thing, because they had a Facebook event page set up, and I don't make any I don't hide any of my activities on Facebook, so I thought there's a possibility that somebody is going to say something about my atheistic activities, but nobody said anything. The only thing that happened was one of my good friends from high school said, he just said, what's that group that you're part of on Facebook? And of course, I'm a member of several, quote unquote groups on Facebook, so I'm sure what he was talking about. I figured that this is where it was going, but he pulled his phone out and started poking around, and finally he said, "Oh yeah, American Free Thought."
Oh, okay.
And so I explained to him it's not a group, it's just it's my own personal thing, and I explained what it was, and then he just sort of nodded his head and he said, "Oh, okay," and he went on with some other part of the conversation, but he didn't seem to be either offended or intrigued.
Oh, okay, just kind of nonchalant.
Yes, exactly.
So interesting.
So anyway, I got out of it without having my ass kicked or something.
Oh yeah, I wouldn't worry too much about that.
Right.
Yeah, I've had some of my 30th is actually coming up in a couple of years, and we've got Facebook stuff going as well. And I've had a couple of people who were really diehard Christians, and I don't remember them being diehard Christians when we were younger, but they are now, and they've given me a little bit of shit, but not too much. So
right.
It'll be interesting when I see them face to face.
Yep.
The other thing we had that was interesting, kind of recognizing the show, was we had a block party here. We've been trying to put this together for a while. We've been living here a year, and we didn't know hardly anybody as the neighbors. So Vonda and one of our neighbors organized a block party. We have a small neighborhood. There's about 37 townhouses, and they're all brand new. They were all just built in the last year. So we had this block party, and we were really surprised. 32 out of the 37 houses showed up. So
that's great.
It was really cool. And one neighbor, actually it was his wife, I was just making small talk with her, and she said something about, she said, it was really weird. We saw a car that had a flying spaghetti monster decal on the back. And my husband was so excited that he took a picture and sent it to one of his college friends.
Okay.
So I said, well, it's my car. I'm sure I'm the only car in the neighborhood that has that on it. So she's like, oh, really? She's like, I didn't know there were rational people that lived here. So she went and got her husband, and we chatted, and he's listening now because I gave him one of my cards with the website. So we'll see. But
no, very cool.
Yeah.
Also, we got some bad news. My wife's father passed away in the last couple of weeks. In fact, we had to cut our DragonCon time short because he, fell ill and had to go into the hospital. And it wasn't unexpected, but it was still, very sad.
Yeah.
Anyway, there was a couple of aspects of his death that I thought would be interesting to our readers, interesting to our listeners. He had a PhD in zoology, and he was a professor of genetics for 30 years at the Medical College of Georgia, which is one of the main medical schools here in the state. And he was a lifelong atheist who married a lifelong atheist. He came out of either the Methodist or the Baptist tradition, and his wife came out of the Jewish tradition, but they were both essentially non-believers, and they didn't subject their daughters to church or any of that.
Yeah, I heard you talk about him many times, but I never got a chance to meet him. I'm kind of bummed. It would have been nice to have met him.
Yeah, he, in his last couple of years, he was not at his best, I would say, just because he was sick and he didn't feel good, and he didn't make any bones about the fact that getting old sucked and that being sick was unpleasant. And to his credit, he didn't sugarcoat things. He didn't pretend like he was going to be going to a better place or any of that sort of thing. But still, it was very sad when he died. And it was funny. He was one of the first people to. You think about, he'd been in the field of genetics for 30-something years. So, and he retired in 95. So he was, I would say, among the first wave of academics to get into biology, in the post-DNA age.
Right, he would have had to have been, because that would have been 65, so yeah.
Yeah, so, and it was funny, he used to tell the story, and now, I don't remember the details, so I may botch it up, but it was funny. He said when he was a graduate student, he spent a summer working in a lab where James Watson had come in, and he was, he's the guy that won the Nobel Prize for the co-discovery of the structure of DNA.
Right.
But Watson is, by all accounts, full of himself, kind of has a big ego, and he was also well known for wearing tennis shoes with no laces.
Okay.
And so, and Watson even writes about this in his own biography, or his autobiography. But according to my father-in-law, he said that Watson had a pair of moccasins that he wore all the time. So one night, I guess they got tired of his crap, so they went in and stole his moccasins and spray painted them gold and put them back. And according to him, Watson never said a word about it, but he kept wearing the moccasins the entire summer.
That's funny. Just said, I'm going to show them, and acted like it didn't even bother him.
Yep. And then he also mentioned one time, very briefly, that he and some other students went out drinking with Isaac Asimov when he came to campus to give some kind of a talk. And of course, when he said that, I'm like, oh my God, I can't believe, and he didn't like science fiction. He didn't read any kind of fiction. He had very little patience for anything pop culture-ish.
Okay.
so maybe the experience was wasted on him. But anyway, he lived in a very religiously conservative part of the state, and he lived in a retirement community that was overwhelmingly white conservative Republicans. And occasionally he would complain, that he didn't really have anybody that he could be frank with, So that was kind of, sucked.
Yeah, but at that age, you should just be able to be frank with whoever you want.
Well, you would hope, but that's just not the way it works, unfortunately. But, he told a few stories where he had to bite his tongue when people would make remarks about Obama or something like that. But at any rate, he passed away about as well as anybody could ask. Both his daughters were literally right there at his side when he passed away. But the reason I wanted to tell about this a little bit, aside from the fact that he was an atheist, that it was kind of funny when in his last hours he was laying in bed unconscious, and the nurse came in to fill out some paperwork, and she said, "What's his religious preference?" And there were 3 of us sitting in the room at the time with him, and all 3 of us at the same time said, "None." And she sort of looked up, and I said, "He's pretty much an atheist." And she's like, "Oh, okay." And she just checked off a box. And I said, "Yeah, if you want to wake him up, the best thing to do would be to bring a chaplain in right about now." So,
that would get his goat going.
Yeah, exactly. And and the other thing was they chose not to have any kind of service. He didn't want any kind of pomp and circumstance. So really the only thing that's going to happen is that his immediate family are going to get together and have a little dinner sometime and just raise a toast, and that'll be the extent of it. And finally his daughters decided that rather than just bury him or cremate him, that they would donate his body to the anatomical science program at the Medical College of Georgia, so he can continue to teach for an indefinite period of time.
Yeah, that is so neat. Here he retired, and now he's going back. So I think that's really cool.
Yeah,
really cool.
Yeah. So we thought that that was both a practical and a humane thing to do. In fact, I'm starting to consider that myself. Of course, I hope I don't have to worry about it for a very long time, but Yeah,
it's actually in my living will, or in my will. My living will says, "Don't resuscitate me, please." But in my will, it says that I'd like to be donated to science. It's just I don't have a particular place yet because I move around so damn much.
Yeah, so. Mine says use all heroic measures. Go to any extreme.
Yeah, we have the opposites. Mine says let him die.
Yeah. So anyway, I raise a virtual toast to my past father-in-law.
Yeah, and as we talked about, my grandfather passed away a couple months ago, and he was a non-believer as well, and very similar. Just no service. We had a service at the funeral home, but not a religious service at all. Mm-hmm. And he and I talked about it a little bit last time I was up there. Just a little. I just kind of drop hints about it, and he was definitely an atheist. It's just something that he didn't show. And one of his daughters, not my mother, was very, very religious. So I think that would have caused a problem. So we wanted to talk about just another one of these nut job people down south in Alabama, where I think you're going to be going soon. So maybe you should drive over and smack this guy in the head. Man,
I don't advocate violence. I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's true.
Unless we get email.
Yeah, and he has a gun. So
yes, this is true.
Yeah, so this is in Bay Minette, Alabama, which I didn't look up, so I actually have no idea where it is. But
it's down in the southwestern part of the state, relatively close to the coast.
Oh, okay. All right. The chief of police, whose name is Mike Rowland, is putting together, actually it's already done, he put together a program where you can choose, if you're a nonviolent first offender, to go into what they call the Restore Our Community program, where you can not have to do jail time or pay fines. You have the option of going to church for the next 52 weeks in a row. Mm-hmm. So, of course, this doesn't even pass the straight face test on is this constitutional or not.
Can I take the jail and the fine?
Take the jail and the fine. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And that's kind of what he's saying, is that we're not forcing anybody to go, so it's completely constitutional. And of course, he's got to be wrong. I can't wait till this all gets hammered out. But the American Civil Liberties Union sent a letter saying, come on, guys, this is a little bit crazy. And the Freedom from Religion Foundation is also involved, and they sent a letter. So I wanted to read what they wrote him. the article that was in the Alabama.com site was rather favorable to him. It wasn't, it just kind of said, oh, we didn't take a side really. But of course, the article that was on the website, Annie, Laurie, and Dan's website, was a little bit more more direct.
Right.
So the staff attorney from FFRF, Patrick Elliott, sent a letter that says, "This proposal is an egregious violation of the First Amendment. It is a bedrock principle of constitutional law that the state cannot coerce citizens to participate in religious practices." Noted Elliott. As the Supreme Court states in Lee versus Weissman, it is beyond dispute that at a minimum, the Constitution guarantees that government may not coerce anyone to support or participate in religion or its exercise, or otherwise act in a way which establishes a state religion or religious faith or tends to do so. And then he goes on also, because it also violates the state constitution. He says it would also be a violation of the Alabama Constitution, Article 1. No preference shall be given by law to any religious sect, society, denomination, or mode of worship, that no one shall be compelled by law to attend any place of worship. So, I mean, we'll see. I can't imagine how this is going to get implemented. But the chief is actually still saying, he actually thanked the ACLU and FFRF. He said, we appreciate them coming forward because it gives us the opportunity to see their side of it and to address the issues that they have concern with.
Yeah, I don't think he really thought that.
I do not think he really thought that. So, but we'll see. This just goes to show you how people's minds, and this is a whole community. The chief of police, they already had the attorney for the town look at it, who said it was fine. Mm-hmm. I mean,
and 56 local churches expressed interest in participating.
Yep, and you got to wonder, out of those 56, how many are Christian? My guess would be 56.
Yes.
So so if you have a Jewish offender, if you have a Muslim offender, what church are they going to go to?
Yeah. Oh. It's the quote that I thought was the most telling about this was Chief Rowland, in talking about this program. He says it kind of starts to show there's a change in the nation as far as their philosophy about what we need to do about people who commit crimes.
Yeah, because your little podunk town in the middle of the Bible Belt does this. It shows a change in the nation.
Yeah, I it's the main reason we're talking about this is just because it's kind of hilarious. But some people were calling it the Jesus or Jail program.
Yep, that's exactly what it is. Yeah. I love it.
But I can't imagine this making it very far in the court system before some judge throws it out.
Yeah, you said you can't imagine it passing. Oh, and I also think that the attorney for the city that put his original stamp of approval on this should be fired, or at least disbarred. Yeah. Can you imagine? How could you actually be an attorney and
with a straight face and say, yeah.
Oh.
What's funny is that the article that you were quoting from was talking about how they have not suspended, but they've postponed implementing this program. It was already supposed to have started, right? But they're saying now they're postponing it to
October 11th.
October 11th, right? And they were saying we are just simply running it back through for final legal review and a final stamp of approval. And he's talking about how they're deliberating and this and that and the other. And I'm thinking nobody's deliberating anything. They're just they're postponing it because somebody in the county, in the city government, is saying, this might cost us a shitload of money if this actually goes to court. And, they're probably just trying to find some way to back out of it.
Yeah. Oh, well, it's really good that we have organizations like Annie Laurie's and Dan Barker's and of course, the ACLU. So I came across an article that I wanted to talk about. The name of the article is Horror Stories from Tough Love Teen Homes. And the author of the article is Kathryn Joyce. Now, I was just going to kind of read through it a bit and just have you and I discuss it. Mm-hmm. But I figured, the author would probably do a lot better job talking about it. So I tracked down Kathryn. She was actually really easy to get a hold of on her website. And she agreed to come on the show. So we just had a wonderful interview with her. So let's listen to the interview. So hello, Kathryn, and welcome to the podcast.
Hi, thanks so much for having me.
Now, we asked you to join us to chat about your article, Horror Stories from Tough Love Teen Homes. Before we get into that, however, I do want to give our listeners a quick bio on you. And most of this I got straight off your website, which is kathrynjoyce.com. And Kathryn is spelled Kathryn, just so that people know that that's how they can get a hold of you. So this is what you said. It says, you're a freelance journalist based in New York City, the author of Quiverfull, Inside the Christian Patriarchy Movement, which we're going to chat about at the end of our discussion a bit. And your writing has appeared in The Nation, Mother Jones, Salon, Slate, Newsweek, and you had a bunch of others on there. You've been very busy. And you were also the managing editor a while ago of therevealer.org. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Sure. That's really how I got started writing about religion. When I was a graduate student at NYU in journalism, I started working at The Revealer, which was a project of the Pew Charitable Trust as one of their so-called centers of excellence through NYU's Center for Religion and Media. And there I had a chance to work with someone who became a great friend and a wonderful mentor, Jeff Charlotte. So I've been working on religion and reproductive rights and religion and women's issues ever since.
And we've actually had Jeff on the show, is it 2 or 3 times, John? I think
twice.
Twice.
He's the man.
Yep. So we've really enjoyed his works. And I tell you, though, one of the things that I found in common between the two of you, when I read his books, I get scared and pissed off. And, and when I read your article here, very similar. So you're both on the same path, I think. The article we want to talk to you about, you focus on a 17-year-old girl that you call Roxy, and that's not her real name. But can you tell us a bit about Roxy's story?
Sure, yeah. Roxy was the name this young woman chose for herself. She was a young woman from Maryland, from a military family that attended conservative Christian churches, had pretty conservative beliefs, a pretty large family. Once last year, when this young woman was out jogging, she was tragically attacked by a group of men, and this brought up, obviously, in her recovery, a lot of issues that she was having to deal with. For her family, who were, I think, just a little thrown by this whole situation, they sought out through their church the services of a group that came to visit. It was a group called New Beginnings Ministries, and they arrived at their church as a chorus, a bunch of beautiful women, young girls who sang in front of the church, testified to how much this home, which is what it is, New Beginnings Ministry, is a troubled teen home in Missouri, how much it had helped them and gotten them on the right track. What her parents heard was that this was a place where their daughter could go and recover and spend time alone with herself, with godly people, and kind of get back on the track of healing. What they came to realize after Roxy was sent there is that this is actually a very punitive, troubled teen home that functions as a religious boot camp for teens. Girls have every aspect of their daily lives monitored down to how many squares of toilet paper they can use. New girls get put on kind of this buddy treatment where more established residents, they're girls who maybe are on the way towards becoming staff, frankly, bully and abuse them to teach them how to get in line. If there's any sort of infraction, which can be something as minor as making eye contact with another girl or talking out of turn or not finishing your supper, these girls will be put on something called the red shirt treatment, which is just standing 10 hours a day facing the wall, which is a stress position, which is a form of torture that is used upon people by our military. And this is something that's being used on teen girls, often from conservative religious families, whose families either think that the girls are out of control and need some help, or else, in the case of Roxy, just are going through, emotional trauma, and they think that this might be something that would be a good retreat experience, and, wow, are they wrong? Wow, does this become something else?
Well, certainly, and, she was obviously kind of suffering from post-traumatic stress. You said attacked. Was she actually sexually abused, or do you know?
I do. It's something that the family has chosen to
Okay.
talk about, and I want to respect that.
That's fine. But in any case, obviously, it was very, very traumatic, and of course, she's going to start having some issues. So she gets sent to this New Beginnings home, and one of the things I was amazed at was the severity of the treatment. I mean, when I was reading this part of your article, it was more like reading a story from the Marquis de Sade. The way I was kind of thinking about it was they were almost getting off on this, on how they abuse these children, making them stand for 10 hours a day. And you mentioned that no matter what was going on, even if she was having menstrual complications at the time, I mean, this is just really downright torture.
It is. It's interesting that this is a network of schools, of boarding homes, whatever you want to call them, residential treatment facilities. This particular school is part of a network of these homes within a very conservative Baptist community that some people call the Independent Fundamental Baptist community. So this is part of a network of, maybe 20 or 30 homes at least across the U.S. It's very hard to know a number because these are, pretty much run completely off the radar. But, they're also part of a larger network of, even secular boot camps that have resulted in death in several cases and some very serious congressional hearings as a result of those deaths and the abuse and the stress positions and physical discipline that's enacted on these kids.
Kathryn, I wanted to ask you, just so I'm clear on this, from what you have been able to determine, are the people that are committing these acts in these homes, do you think they're doing it out of genuine good intentions, but they're just completely twisted, or is it that they're completely twisted and they're using good intentions as a cover to get away with some of this stuff?
I mean, to be honest, I'm sure it's a little bit of both. I mean, I think this is a community that has strong ideas about spare the rod, spoil the child, and these homes take that philosophy to the most extreme degree. Children are put in isolation cells, forced to listen to sermons for hours on end, just looping these fundamentalist sermons. In older versions of these homes, I think that this part has been cracked down a little bit in recent years, but I think it's still out there. There was just tremendous physical abuse, whipping people, 50 times or more, 50 or more strikes in a go. Just tremendous physical abuse that left, horrendous damage, and this is stuff that's been the focus of, state level congressional investigations and also, as I said, the federal congressional investigation. So I think, there is some sense that this is the shared philosophy of, strict discipline is going to turn these kids around, and that's how it's presented to parents. But I also think that these places are so severely unregulated that I'm sure they attract people who do have emotional disturbances and do have a predisposition to abuse children, whether
kind of predatory types,
emotionally, physically, or sexually. Yeah, I think any time there's unregulation, it's going to attract predators.
Now, you mentioned unregulated. Are these places that state agencies refer children to as, part of a faith-based initiative sort of thing, or in any other context where the state is officially providing patients, quote-unquote, for these people?
I think that's a really interesting question. I know that in some of the secular counterparts for these homes that there have been judges who will send children to these sorts of homes or these sorts of boot camp programs in lieu of going to juvenile hall, juvenile justice system, when in fact, as problematic as the juvenile justice system is, at least there is some state oversight, whereas these places tend to be, run almost in a Wild West fashion. Particularly I found in this piece, the magazine title of it was called Escape from Missouri, because Missouri has just become an absolute hotbed for these sorts of homes. They are located, far out in the rural reaches of this state, so rural that postal workers from Missouri have reported that they're unable to identify the locations of some of these places. And state officials in Missouri have complained that, their hands are tied when it comes to regulating them, because most of them are registered, if at all, as faith-based services, and the state there has such strong protections of faith-based services that it has no option to come in and provide oversight for these homes unless, some parents who are angry will choose to go the route of, making a complaint about false advertising or some other kind of technical way that they can get at these schools. But they cannot provide any oversight in terms of education laws, and they can't in terms of child protection laws, because there are so many exemptions for faith-based facilities there.
Yeah, and that's the sad part. A normal secular place like this would be regulated to the hilt, and these guys essentially can do whatever they want. One good example of that was where Clark Word was held up for a while, and they actually got raided. But can you tell us a little bit about that one? This was, I didn't write down the name of the place that he was at.
Sure. No, that was... It sounds really familiar, really similar. That the first place was New Beginnings, and this school was called New Bethany. This one was actually in Louisiana, and it existed in at least kind of three different versions, as a girls' home in Louisiana, as a boys' home in Louisiana, and later that boys' home got run out of the state basically for child abuse, and they set up shop instead in South Carolina. That was later raided, and it came back to Louisiana. So just long story short, these homes have a tremendous history of just state hopping to evade regulations, because there are no federal regulations. So they just go to the states that are friendliest to their way of operating, which is to say most hands-off in terms of oversight. New Bethany came from the same lineage as this school, New Beginnings. They're both what could be called roll-off homes. They both come from the vision of a Texas evangelist named Lester Roloff, who started one of the first forms of this homes back in the 60s. And he started a model of these very tough love homes, very heavy on physical discipline, very strong on fundamentalist Baptist teachings. He started the model of these isolation closets or cells where children are left potentially for days at a time in stress positions in cells to listen to fundamentalist sermons. So he really set up this model, and there are dozens of roll-off schools that still exist around the country today. New Bethany shut down around 2001, but before that it had about 30 years history of taking teenagers and even preteens in. One of these was a man named Clark Word, who's now in his 40s. So he was there in the 1980s, and he just witnessed tremendous and was the victim of tremendous abuse. He watched, young children as young as 10 get punched full on in the face. His brother was in the South Carolina version of this home, and there he was put in one of these isolation cells, and that when there was a police raid a little bit later, the police found him there. This Clark Word's brother, bound in his underwear and chained, and he had been left in this room for days. Other boys had been put on these kind of makeshift rope chain gangs to work the gardens. And when the police came, the sheriff came in that county and found this, they were just absolutely appalled. And I spoke with some of them, and even 30 years later, they remember this strongly and, are still appalled at the conditions they found.
And part of the a raid you talked about, they uncovered handguns, rifles, leg irons, handcuffs. These, like I said,
that was actually in yet another school, and that raid just took place a couple of years ago. Also down in Alabama. So. Uh-huh. The legacy of these homes has lasted a long time, and it's still ongoing.
Wow.
Now, is it not necessarily to give cover for the enemy, but is it fair to characterize this whole situation as most of these Christian homes are both well-meaning and well-run and reasonably effective, and it's just the fact that they're unregulated that leads to a small percentage where there's this shocking abuse? Or does it seem to be that this is more or less standard operating procedure for these kinds of places?
I have to say, I think that this is more or less standard operating procedures. I spoke with past residents, most of them call themselves survivors, of, more than half a dozen schools. And I have to clarify, some are the secular cousins of these fundamentalist homes, and to be honest, they are run in largely the same way. But the fundamentalist homes do have the added cover of faith-based services. This just seems to be almost a natural repercussion of allowing these schools to operate, so much off the radar, and to use such extreme methods. They just seem to lend themselves to being overused and to becoming abuse, because there are just repetitive stories from all corners of this community.
And so how is it that the secular schools can get away without any kind of regulation? I mean, I kind of understand the concern with religious schools is, there's issues of separation of church and state and not wanting the government to interfere with people's belief systems. But especially when it comes to a completely secular organization, it would seem that the state would have clear authority to investigate and regulate and do whatever they needed to do.
Well, I'll answer that first, and then I'll clarify what I mean by secular. I think the fact is that it's all on a state-by-state level. All of this is regulated at the state level, and the attempts that there have been to create a federal standard of regulation and a federal standard for what protections children who are incarcerated in these places are entitled to. For example, whether or not they have access to an 800 number hotline to report abuse. These efforts have stalled out. Sometimes the senators and congresspeople who have spoken about them have said that their constituents brought up concerns that, regulating this would interfere with parental rights. A lot of times they bring up the fact that this is a state-level issue and states can handle that. But if you look at the case of Missouri and how wildly out of control things are in this state, and that's something that the state press has documented extensively, I think it's really wrong-headed to believe that the state can handle this. And in terms of secular programs, they certainly are secular in terms of lack of affiliation. But from speaking with survivors from these secular homes, they are run much on the same lines and with the same undercurrent of, finding a higher power and submitting to that and confessing sins that the fundamentalist schools are. So I think that's maybe a deeper story than we have time to go into today, but there are kind of just bone-deep structural similarities between these two groups.
So they're not secular in the sense that, say, David and I would think of as like sponsored by some atheist group or sponsored by some secular humanist group.
Absolutely not. They're just not church affiliated, but they still do
I see.
a similar kind of religious structure.
Oh, that makes sense.
Do you know of any? When was this article published? Just recently, right?
Yeah, this was in the July-August version of of Mother Jones.
Okay, so it's been out
available on their website.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so it's been out for several months, and we'll put a link to it in our show notes. But are you aware of any traction that this article is getting in terms of actions by any government agencies or law enforcement?
I'm not sure about law enforcement. I spoke to a number of members of law enforcement who have tried to strike out against these schools and these homes without success. And, speaking to the DA down in Alabama who'd gone after one of these homes that was called Reclamation Ranch, that was the one where they found shackles and leg irons and handcuffs and guns, which were used to discipline the students by some of the staff. He was just tremendously frustrated that all of his efforts to press a conviction did not succeed. He thinks that there are, there tend to be strong kind of local political support structures for these homes, as well as just an ingrained sense that you don't mess with states' rights. So I haven't heard of anything happening directly yet as a result of that, but I think that there has been an increasing amount of coverage, and people from different schools are starting to come out and step up their activism. Particularly, there's a group in Indiana, a group of survivors from a women's home called Hephzibah House, who are very active protesters. They protest outside the courthouse of their county where this home is located regularly. So I think, momentum potentially could start to build for getting more scrutiny on these homes at least, and whether or not the states will, take some initiative to look into them and see how they could prosecute more effectively, that remains to be seen.
Right. Well, yeah, and let's hope so. And I have to say, even though we've talked about on this podcast over the years some awfully frustrating and depressing and infuriating things, and this article is probably right there at the top. But having said all that, we are so grateful that there are people like you out there who are willing to dig into this stuff, because I just couldn't do it. I would end up jumping off a bridge somewhere probably if I had to deal with this sort of thing on an extended basis.
Yeah, I mean, I have to pass that on to my admiration to the survivors who have become just absolute activists about this, kind of the most unlikely backgrounds, and they have really pushed to make people understand what it was that they went through.
They're certainly the heroes in this story, and hopefully something will happen in the near future. I never get my hopes up, though. We'll see when it comes to trying to straighten out anything that has that religious tag on it. People just seem to run. So, on a much lighter subject, your book, Quiverfull, is something we wanted to talk about. And now this is a book about how modern fundamental Christian women are taking control of their lives and telling their controlling husbands to kiss off, correct?
Yeah, exactly.
So, I think I got that almost perfectly opposite. So tell us a little bit about Quiverfull.
Well, Quiverfull itself refers to one specific conviction that a lot of women in these movements share, which is that you cannot be a Christian and use birth control or try to limit or plan the size of your family in any way. That your body, specifically your uterus, belongs to God, and you have to let God plan and give you each as many children as He desires. So they see this as really kind of an extreme version of living out anti-abortion convictions, that they are going to prove the truth of their pro-life message by showing that every child is an unqualified blessing, by accepting as many of them as God will give them. What goes along with this that makes it more kind of a more complete lifestyle is, as you can expect, a very serious dedication to the idea that men are the leaders, the spiritual and earthly leaders of the family, that wives' job is to be graciously submissive and to become prolific mothers to many children and to raise their kids up to follow in their footsteps. So this becomes a really kind of whole cloth lifestyle wherein women are homeschooling many children. They are submissive wives and stay-at-home wives, obviously, but also submissive to varying degrees, whether that means just, acknowledging your husband's always going to have the final say, or some of the more extreme versions I encountered of submitting a daily itinerary to your husband and making sure, that he approves of how you're spending your time.
Wow. Yeah, you might want to bring that up with your wife. I think she'd really go for that.
Yeah.
Now, some of these women, and I actually don't know if this was in your book or not, but it was one of the articles that was on your website that I read. Some of these Quiverfull women are actually taking it even to more extreme and practicing unassisted childbirth. correct?
Yeah. Yeah, that's an offshoot of the movement as well. I did write a little bit about that. There is an interesting kind of point. It's like the two ends of a circle meeting, where some of the very extreme Quiverfull people have a very naturalistic approach to childbirth that almost comes around to meet where you would see some very crunchy kind of progressive people, but they infusing this with religion, it becomes something that can be sometimes dangerous, particularly with home births. A lot of people are doing or interested in home births these days, but doing it unassisted became a bit of a fad in this movement among some of its more extreme members, and it led to. I spoke with the granddaughter of the woman who promoted this movement. She's now a feminist activist, and she estimated that her grandmother's teachings led to at least 7 deaths that she knew of, including several children. So this was an idea that God is so much in control of your fertility and your pregnancies and your womb that you need to turn all control over. That's not something that's shared by everyone in the Quiverfull movement. I think one of the most prominent families that follow these sorts of teachings, though they're not always clear whether or not they actually claim the title Quiverfull, is the Duggar family, the reality TV family that has 19 children and counting. Mm-hmm. And obviously anybody familiar with that show has seen the wife in this family have her deliveries in a hospital. So it's not something by any means that's shared among all Quiverfull people, but it is an indication of how people getting involved in this already kind of extreme pro-life movement have egged each other on to even more extreme demonstrations of, what they consider faith, that these are all movements in faith in God, that He's going to protect you. And some of them have ended up being very dangerous and costing the health or lives of mothers and their children.
Mm-hmm. I'm curious how, if people want to live this way, that's one thing, but I'm curious if you know anything about how difficult it is for people to get out of the movement if they desire to. It's not, does it reach cult-like proportions where, it's virtually impossible or very difficult to disassociate?
Sure. It's in leaving, I think it could be cult-like. It's such a widespread and diverse network that I don't think it fits the traditional definition of a cult, because these are people from many different churches and communities mm-hmm. But they are sharing these extremely rigid doctrines with one another, and they do end up clustering in fairly insular communities. So if a woman decides to leave, that usually means leaving everything behind, sometimes including your children if your husband seizes them. There have been, since I wrote the book, one of the women I interviewed, who is just my absolute hero, Vicki Garrison, has started a community for women who are leaving Quiverfull or Quiverfull-like communities. She has a website called No Longer Quivering, and on there she started a project to provide, some assistance for women who are leaving this community. And I think they're, always happy to have, any kind of support that people can give. But there are more people speaking out about their efforts to leave. I know her story, and that of one of her friends when they first were getting this started is, that when they tried to leave, they lost the support of all of their friends. Women who are going out from Quiverfull into the world are not just going out like exiting a divorce in the way that most of us are, potentially with debt, with tough issues about child custody, but they're also going out with, despite their many years of work in the home as mothers and laborers and home educators, they're going out with a blank resume. They're going out without any references, because most people in their community will shun them or at least refuse to provide a reference so that they could get a job to support themselves or, secure an apartment to live in. And then they're doing this on top of it all with 7 to 12 children that they may have now no way of providing for. It's extremely difficult to leave, and I think it's astonishing that any women do find the strength and the conviction to do so, considering those odds.
Yeah, something else that occurred to me, and David and I talked about this a little bit when we were setting up the interview. There's sort of an irony here, as I see it, that the secular side of American society basically says, we're just another animal, but we're intelligent, and therefore we're able to override some of our evolutionary mandates. And the very religious people are the ones that most vehemently deny that we are just animals. They insist that we are set aside from the rest of nature. But yet these Quiverfull people are the ones that they're acting out their evolutionary and genetic mandate to breed as much as possible and have as many children as possible. So I just thought that was kind of odd.
Yeah, I mean, I'm less concerned with the idea of how many children people have. I think that's an intensely personal decision, but I think
Sure.
when it becomes a community that is pressuring women to do this and pressuring girls, daughters from the time they are quite young, by telling them this is a woman's highest role and, this is really the highest thing you can aspire to, then I do think that that's very coercive. If a family wants to have 10 children, I really strongly believe that's their business, but when it's something that's being prescribed as the only role that a woman can have and still be right with God, then I think that's certainly an abuse of power.
Right. I also wanted to ask you, not to derail things, but you mentioned earlier about this emphasis on women being submissive to their husbands, and it reminded me of the comment that Michelle Bachmann made a few weeks ago about how she was asked about a comment of being submissive to her husband that she had made, and she rationalized it by saying that submission means mutual respect, which I thought was just a complete shoehorning and redefinition of a word that seemed to have a very clear meaning to me anyway.
Yeah.
And not to get into
agree.
partisan politics, but I'm just curious what your thoughts are on that.
I completely agree. I think she's doing some very fast footwork there. She's trying to signal to her base that she holds these very conservative theological positions, and at the same time she's trying to make this palatable to a mainstream society and also square it with the fact that, she's a woman running for office. I think this balancing act is something that you can see in many of the conservative women who are leaders in this movement. And, that's no mistake. Many of the leaders in this movement are women. And I think that's something we've traditionally seen in conservative women back to Phyllis Schlafly and before that, is there are certain women in fundamentalist or right-wing communities who are allowed to have a career as long as that career is telling other women to stay at home and to mind their husbands. And I think, to some extent, Michelle Bachmann is not, directly in that model, but I think, in some ways she's a child of that model. And I think it's a similar compromise on language. But the real thing that you have to keep in mind about the doctrine of wifely submission, even when some conservative Christians will try to fudge it a little bit for a mainstream audience and say, no, this really means we submit to each other, we respect each other. What most mainstream, even evangelical churches that believe in this doctrine will tell you is that your obligation to be submissive is not an obligation to your husband, it's an obligation to God. And
right.
So that means even if your husband is not holding up his end of the bargain, because the actual kind of paired obligation on a husband's part is not to submit to his wife, as most conservative Christian churches would have it. It's that he loves his wife as Christ loves the church. But really, what most evangelical churches will emphasize is that Christian women, it's your duty to be submissive to your husband as God's representative here on earth, whether or not he is fulfilling his duty to love you as Christ loves the church. And so this, in a number of stories I've reported on, has enabled domestic violence at home. But I think even in homes that are not violent, it's a very pitched double standard, because women in this theology must be submissive even if their husband is not showing them Christ-like love. And, if that was your one kind of protection, it's not there in terms of how the church enforces that.
Yeah, once again, throw a little bit of religion into something, even as nice as a relationship between a husband and a wife, and it can go south really quickly. Well, hey, Kathryn, I really appreciate you taking the time out of your day to chat with us. We both really enjoyed the article, and we both want to read Quiverfull. We just hadn't had a chance to yet, so that's certainly on my stack, and I'm looking forward to getting even more depressed.
I'm interspersed with other things.
Yes, exactly. So I really appreciate you chatting with us, and keep up the good work.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed it.
Thanks.
That was Kathryn Joyce, the author of the book Quiverfull, which we'll put a link to in the show notes. She's also the author of, what's the name of that article again?
The article is Horror Stories from Tough Love Teen Homes.
Right, yeah, and as we mentioned in the interview, it's a fantastic article and a great public service, but it is at the same time extraordinarily depressing and frustrating to read. But let's hope that by giving some publicity to these kinds of things, that some action will be taken.
Boy, I hope so. This is why we do what we do, to try to bring people's attention up on things like this. Just bad stuff.
Yeah, and again, her website is KathrynJoyce.com, spelled Kathryn, KathrynJoyce.com.
Right, and of course you can find the book Quiverfull on Amazon.com.
The last thing we wanted to talk about, and this is maybe a little bit more on the lighter side.
That's good, because this hasn't been a very light show.
Yeah. I don't know if you're aware of it, but Galileo was a douchebag.
I was not aware of that until I read it in the show notes.
Yes.
Do tell.
Yes. Well, I was recently at an event that, and the thing is, I'm going to be a little vague about where this was and who this was, mainly because the following dialogue that I'm going to read for you was not done in the context in which I said, I'm a blogger and I'm a podcaster, so I don't want to out somebody when they were being frank with me, but I think I can safely share this with our listeners without giving away too much. But anyway, I was at this event where there was a guided discussion about the depiction of religion on television and in the movies. And it just so happens that this discussion was guided by a young Catholic priest. Anyway, he was a young guy in his 30s. He was wearing blue jeans and sneakers, and it was funny. He was wearing this white undershirt and a black T-shirt over it that said in big white block letters, "Priest."
Oh, like he wasn't advertising or anything.
Yeah, but it was funny because the white T-shirt made it look like a collar, and then it said "Priest." So he was obviously trying to appeal to the younger, hipper demographic. But at any rate, in one part of this discussion, he complained that movies often depict religious people as bad guys, or religion as the enemy of science. And that's fair enough. That's true that there are plenty of movies and TV shows that they trot out kind of the stereotypical priest or preacher, So I'll give him that. But then he said, as an example of this, he mentioned the kind of the oversimplified account of the Galileo Affair as science versus superstition. And what he said was, it wasn't so much about religion as it was about Galileo being kind of a douchebag. And this is what he really said. I mean, that's exactly what he said, almost word for word.
Oh, okay.
So anyway, just to recap, though, in 1633, the Roman Inquisition convicted Galileo Galilei of heresy for holding the doctrine that the sun was at the center of the universe and that the earth orbits the sun. So he was sentenced to house arrest, where he remained for the next 9 years until his death in 1642. So my first impulse was to raise my hand and argue with him about this, but something in my mind just said, just hang back and see if anybody else says anything.
I think what you should have done was asked him for a definition of a douchebag. It'd be fun to hear a priest actually explain that.
Yeah, that would be interesting. So, but I just thought, I just want to see if anybody else says anything. Because if I get into it with him, it'll just be 15 minutes of me talking to him, and I won't learn anything, you know. So nobody else said a word. Nobody blinked an eye. Nobody squirmed, as far as I could tell. Nobody said anything. So, but the next day, I sent him an email. And if you'll indulge me, I'll just read to you. And I'm not going to tell you his name. I'm going to call him Father Blankety Blank.
Okay.
How's that?
That sounds good.
So I say, Dear Father Blankety Blank, I was in attendance at your talk last night. While the bulk of the discussion was amicable and interesting, if not particularly enlightening, I was intrigued by one thing you said fairly early on. When referring to the Galileo incident, you said, it wasn't so much about religion as it was about Galileo being kind of a douchebag. If that's not an exact quote, it's pretty darn close. I found this summary a bit shocking. As I was there to listen and learn, I waited to see if anyone else would say anything, but no one took the bait. I would love the opportunity to talk with you more about this, either in person or via email, etc., etc., etc. Thanks, John C. Snider. So, I thought, I'll never hear from the guy. You know.
Right.
Similar to...
If you should have signed it, though, John C. Snider, you know, podcast host, avid atheist.
Yeah, the reason I didn't do that was because I thought if I do that, that'll even is more likelihood to scare him off. Because I really wanted to hear an explanation of this. But anyway, to my surprise, he actually responded, and he says, Hi, John. Thanks for your email, and in particular, thank you for coming to the panel. Let me first say that maybe I shouldn't have dropped the D-bag remark. It was in the moment. However overly vernacular it may have been, I would still stand by the sentiment. Have you read Reston's bio? And he's referring to James Reston Jr.'s biography called Galileo, A Life. That was published in 1994. Anyway, he goes on, it's very accessible and it focuses on the politics and personalities of the situation more than the actual scientific issues. It would be my contention that after years of insulting friend and foe alike, when the time came for his peers to rally to his cause, he was met with the ashes of burnt bridges. The point I was trying to make, and apparently failed to do so, was that this sad chapter of history is often depicted in a very stark contrast between the exercise of sane reason versus fanatical religious devotion, and that it only underscores that faith and reason are to be seen as mutually exclusive dispositions. I simply don't believe this to be the case. So for the sake of clarity, the situation with Galileo was a tragedy for a variety of reasons, but should be understood as a nuanced case of personalities and politics trumping principles, more so than trying to stifle scientific exploration, which is what seems to be the far more popular narrative. Hope that helps. Again, thanks for coming. Signed, Father Blankety Blank.
Well, that's perfect. So I'm sure you just let it go at that because he answered your question exactly.
Yeah. Actually, when I read that, my first thought was, wow, he actually responded. And then my second thought, as I started to think more about it, it started to piss me off even more. So I sent him this email. And I said, Dear Father Blankety Blank, thanks for your quick reply. No, I have not yet read Reston's book, but I have read other Galileo materials, and I've interviewed one Galilean expert, Dr. Maurice Finocchiaro, who wrote a study of the lengthy aftermath of the Galileo Affair that spanned the period from the death of Galileo to John Paul II's greatly belated apology, which our listeners will remember. That was one of our very first episodes. I forget which one.
Yeah, it was in the teens, I think. So.
Yeah.
Yep.
So anyway, I say I agree with you that the Galileo Affair was a tragedy and an immensely complicated sequence of events that intermingled science, politics, personalities, and religion. However, I would characterize it as a contrast not between reason and fanatical religious devotion, but rather a contrast between reason and cynical religious authoritarianism. As much of a douchebag as Galileo may have been, he was on the side of right, both scientifically and, as it turns out, theologically, in that his opinions on the literacy of the Bible conform with the supposedly more enlightened view adopted by the modern Catholic Church. The Catholic Church, however, was decidedly in the wrong, and they knew it. Whether Galileo was correct or incorrect is actually beside the point. The bottom line is that the Church was determined to stifle dissent and smother any sources of information that might challenge the orthodoxy. The Church authorities could have chosen to rein in the priests who publicly accused Galileo from the pulpits of being in league with the devil. They could have, as embarrassing as it might have been for them, admitted that maybe the Church didn't know everything about every subject. Instead, they decided to ruin the reputation of a man whose only crime was that of being stubborn and prickly, a douchebag to use the vernacular. And I added a little smiley face just to take the sting off. That they merely showed him the instruments of torture and allowed an old man to live out his last years under house arrest, publicly shamed and intellectually shackled, was considered merciful, considering how the Church treated other problematic personalities. See Bruno, Giordano. At any rate, while you are correct if you claim Galileo didn't make it easy for the authorities to cut him some slack, you do a great disservice to your audience by dismissing him as you did and not admitting the greater, more important point that the Galileo Affair was really about the Church cynically maintaining its monopoly on the truth, quote unquote. Thanks again, John C. Snider. So that was where it ended.
Right, you haven't heard back, and this was a few days ago. So
that was weeks ago now, but
yeah. So, oh well. I think you were very succinct in your response, and I don't think there's much you really could say. So
I don't know. I really would have loved to sit down with him and like talk about this and what, you know. I mean, I understand he wants to defend the Church, and but still, I really the funny thing is that I've never thought of the pop culture depictions of the Galileo Affair as being particularly focused on science versus superstition. In other words, I never got the impression that the Church really honestly believed that the Earth was the center of the universe or something like that. It was more that Galileo was advertising this and poking holes in the Bible, and it was undermining their authority. So it was more of a cynical thing than it was people who held legitimate but nonetheless superstitious beliefs.
Well, but when you get down to it, though, I mean, one of the greatest minds of humanity was thrown under house arrest until he died because of religion and a single book.
Announcements. We just got one announcement this time. Is I will be speaking to the Alabama Free Thought Association on Sunday, October the 16th. Did you ever make it out to Lake Hypatia?
I never did. I always wanted to go to one of the FFRF's 4th of July events that they have out there.
Yeah, they own a property. I don't know if they actually own. I guess they must own the whole lake, but they own this property, and there's a very nice little lake on it that they've named Lake Hypatia, and it's near Munford, Alabama. It's about a 2-hour drive, probably, from Atlanta. But anyway, this event is, as I mentioned, Sunday, October the 16th. The social hour starts at 11 a.m., followed by lunch, and the meeting starts at 1 p.m., and I'm going to be giving my 20th Century Twain talk again.
Oh, good. That's great. You've actually been able to give that 3 times now, so that's really worth the effort. Good.
Yeah, so, if you haven't had a chance to hear this talk, or you just want a good excuse to go to Lake Hypatia, I'll post something on the website about all the details of how to get there and so forth.
Well, that's it for this podcast. Don't forget to visit us at AmericanFreeThought.com.
Thanks for listening.